right, how's that look?
Great.
Okay, wonderful. So appreciate that. I know it's a little odd, doing this from distributed locations. So a little bit different. Normally, if I were on a stage, this would all be set, ready to go, and we wouldn't have that transition. So I'm Doc Norton. I'm a Agile and leadership coach. As Tim said, he and I have had the opportunity to work together on and off for the last year. It's been a fantastic experience. And I'm here today to talk to you about leadership. The title of this talk is Leadership Starts with an Invitation. And I want to start off with us just kind of thinking a little bit about what actually is an invitation. Easily it's a request for participation, right? It's you can receive an invitation to a party. And I think when we think about invitation, a lot of times that's kind of the thing that we think of is some kind of formal request for participation, whether that's an invite to a meeting or, hey, you got a sec, or an actual formal invitation that gets sent to us. But you know what else is invitation is, it's something that tempts or encourages others to behave in a certain way. That can also be an invitation. You may not be the one that does it, but I bet you have worked with someone who leaves a bowl of candy on their desk. Well, that's an invitation. That's an invitation, one, for coworkers to partake, but it's an invitation to maybe sit a little bit longer, an invitation to stay just a little bit longer and maybe engage in a different conversation, right? Invitations can be an action or a situation that's designed to make a particular outcome more likely. So it's not a direct ask. It's not necessarily the candy bowl, but maybe it's the way that we actually have designed a space, open areas in an office with tables and comfortable seating. That's an invitation to collaborate. So what's an invitation? If those things are all invitations, what is not an invitation? What is an invitation not? Well, I think that an invitation is not a command or an order. It is always a request or an enabler. And it's not a policy or a procedure. It might encourage behavior, but it does not mandate behavior. So with these kind of thoughts about invitations in mind, I actually have several invitations for you today. Your first invitation is to join me as we take a brief look at our kind of prevailing models of leadership today. What are the various things we think of when we think of leadership? And in my mind, there are really two prevailing models, and I think that they're both helpful, but as all models, they're wrong. And those two are Lord or servant. And I don't think leadership, really good leadership, falls into either of these very well. So, what's Lord leadership? I kind of made this term up because it fits, opposed to servant leadership. But lords are those who have power and authority by title or by order. Servants are those who influence through service and then gain that authority, right? So the fundamental difference between these two is actually service. Lord leader achieves through others by utilizing them as resources. So people act in service to a Lord leader. And through that, the Lord leader amasses power, wealth, and status. A servant leader focuses on the growth and well-being of people, focuses on the communities to which they belong. The servant leader actually acts in service to the people and thereby shares power, wealth, and status. Like I said, I think these are both actually poor metaphors for leadership. And I realize that I'm committing some heresy right now, saying that servant leadership is a poor model amongst an agile community. I think Lord and servant are kind of extreme ends on a spectrum. But what really kind of bothers me, especially about the servant leadership, is it tells us very little about how to do the work of leadership. It doesn't contain within it really the activities themselves. We have, as a community, maybe extrapolated activities by interpreting the 7 pillars of servant leadership. But if you look at kind of the original texts and, what is the composition of servant leadership, there's very little guidance around activity. It's all kind of aspirational personality traits. The 7 pillars of servant leadership basically tell us who a person is. So let's take a look at those for a bit. You all may be familiar with these. We're going to run through them just quick though. So those 7 pillars are that you are a person of character who puts people first, that you are a skilled communicator who is a compassionate collaborator, that you have foresight, and that you are a systems thinker. Now you may notice that there's only 6, there is a 7th, we'll get to it in a second. But I want you to take a look at this list of character attributes which define a servant leader. These are 6 of the 7 pillars of servant leadership. They're relatively vague. They're difficult for people to gauge without actually further study. Like, what exactly does that look like? What does that mean? But here's something that I found very interesting in my history coaching leaders and working in organizations. I want you to imagine for a second that you are a Lord leader, that you have people who report to you, and you leverage those people, you drive them to get work done. Now, you believe yourself to be truly deserving of this role, and perhaps you are. You've earned it. You've earned it by hard work, just like everybody else. Of course, statistically, you're a white male over the age of 30 with a partially or even completely paid for higher education, who is in absolutely no way accustomed to being asked to take the meeting minutes, doesn't know what it feels like to be talked over, and rarely has had their contributions heard, only when someone else repeats them. But you got it all on your own. So you are this individual, this Lord leader, who is accustomed to this hierarchy, who is accustomed to this power, and who knows that this is the right way for things to be done. And someone brings to you the servant leadership model, and they set before you the 7 pillars. And you look at the 7 pillars and you think to yourself, well, am I a person of character? Well, yes, I have character. Do I put people first and communicate well? Am I a compassionate systems thinking collaborator who has foresight? Well, of course I am. Of course I do. As the designated leader of this group, a position I've earned, I think that I'm all of these things. No one tells me otherwise. Well, okay, except for those few dissenters on the last employee satisfaction survey, but we're coaching those low performers out. And besides, it's logical. Like, these are the important characteristics of a leader, and I am a leader. Therefore, I have all of these characteristics. And then we get to the 7th characteristic. And a Lord leader might dare to ask themselves, well, do I lead with moral authority? Now here's the trick to that question. You don't get to answer that question. You don't get to declare your moral authority over other people any more than you get to declare their trust in you. If you have it, if you even think you have it, the moment that you exploit it, you've lost it. Moral authority is given to you by every individual within the organization. You earn it. You exemplify that you are constantly performing to the other 6 pillars, and moral authority is granted unto you. Now, I don't want you to get me wrong. I've given this talk before, and people have walked away with the impression that I don't like servant leadership. That is not true at all. I really do like servant leadership. I read the book years ago. I've studied the model, and I do find it to be somewhat useful. But the pillars aren't particularly helpful. They're vague, they're aspirational, And you might as well toss in being bias-free, having the ability to solve logic problems, and driving. These are more things that people are generally bad at, but believe they're good at. Can anyone say Dunning-Kruger effect? So if this model's not very useful, what could we look to? Is there a model that maybe is a little more useful in terms of helping leaders understand what it is they're supposed to do, not just who it is they're supposed to be? And with that, I'm going to extend my second invitation to you. This is an invitation to consider a host as a metaphor or a model for good leadership. Someone who hosts a party or an event is a good model for leadership. Now, why is that? If we look at, and host leadership, by the way, is a codified model. If we look at that model, one of the things that they've done in it is they've said, look, every host has fundamentally 6 roles. There's additionally in the model where the host resides in the event. I'm not going to touch on that. You're welcome to read about it. I'm going to just focus in on these 6 roles. So the 6 roles of host leadership are initiator, inviter, space creator, upholder, connector, and co-participator. Now, I'm going to tell you, if you go and you research host leadership, it's been around for a while, and the upholder role is my renaming of a role that they call the gatekeeper. You might imagine in today's climate why I chose not to use gatekeeper, and I think upholder is still true to the essence of that particular role. So what are these roles, right? So now we're looking at, like, instead of personality traits, I'm actually looking at roles that I might take on as a leader. So the initiator, well, they provide the initial spark. They have the idea that might become a broader initiative. Or maybe it's just the idea that we should get together and eat some cake because people have birthdays. There's the inviter. So this is the person that actually invites the relevant people to join the idea, extends to community. These are folks who bring the attendees to this event. We have space creator. Space creator actually creates the environment, physical environment, of course, but also the emotional environment. These are both environments where something is really happening, where people are interacting and engaging with one another. We have the upholder. So the upholder is someone who actually protects the space, perhaps, and upholds the rules. Sometimes they have to remind others what the rules are. The connector puts people in touch. So it's a relatively large event, let's say, and a connector, and you probably know a connector if you're not one, is someone who, oh, hey, Tom, I don't know if you know Sally. She's an amazing developer. You might want her on her team. You two should talk. That's the connector. They put people in touch with each other who otherwise might not engage in a conversation, who otherwise might not cooperate or collaborate on some broader initiative. And then the last role is that of a co-participator. And as a leader, sometimes leaders forget, especially, to take on the role of co-participator. As a co-participator, we are an equally important part of the system that we helped to create. We're not just the creators, we're actually in the thing, engaging, doing the work, participating in the event as equals with others around us. So introducing the 6 roles of a host leader, I'm going to extend to you a third invitation. This invitation, I want you to journey with me back in time. I'm going to take you to time in my life when what became an enduring tradition for us was actually started quite by accident. Now, throughout this story, I want you to see if you can identify moments when these host roles show up and maybe recognize who in the story is playing that role at that moment. Feel free to drop those in the chat. If you notice one of the host roles coming up, just drop it in the chat that it's happened. And if you happen to notice who is playing that role, feel free to put their name in there. The names might come by pretty quick, so you may not notice. That's okay. And what I'm going to do to help here, because I realize there's 6 roles and it's the first time you've seen them, I'm going to go ahead and put these down here to the right. And I'm going to leave them on the screen as we go through this experience together. All right? So, going back in time. It's 2002. My wife and I lived here, literally here. This is a photo of our house. We lived here with our 2 kids, our 2 dogs, our 2 birds, our 1 cat, and our 3 fish. It was a 750, 800 square foot home, a little bit larger when you counted the really wonky bedroom that was crammed into the rafters after the house had been built. This neighborhood, how can I say here? It was a senior slum. The homes were built 1940s. Most of the residents in this neighborhood were first owners. These homes were very cheaply built. They were very quickly built. At the time in Akron, Ohio, where this is, Firestone and Goodyear were growing extensively, and homes were just basically being set up in rows, and people were just moving in with their tiny little families or their huge families, whatever. So not very well built. Almost everybody in the neighborhood, again, like I said, was a first-time owner. So a lot of them were over 80, and the homes hadn't been updated in about 20 years. Now, to my good fortune, we bought the house very cheap. We lived there for 12 years, and as consistent with my fortune, we sold it even cheaper. So not only did we not make any money when we actually moved out of this place, but really living there for 12 years, we didn't make any friends while we were living in that neighborhood. Most of the interactions with our neighbors took place via slightly drawn curtains, precisely timed scowls, or random informative exchanges. You know the kind. Listen, Sonny, I just wanted to inform you my property line runs adjacent to your walnut tree, and your walnuts are killing my grass. Seriously, dude, you've lived here for like 50 years. That giant tree's been here the whole time. You haven't gotten over this yet? So we gladly moved out of that neighborhood, and we moved into this house. And yes, again, actually this house. This is a photo of the new place. We wanted a better life. We wanted more space. And as you can probably see, we got more space, so much more space. Oh, and we got 4 bathrooms instead of 1. There was no more potty dance waiting for my wife and daughter after a road trip. Dude, we would hit the entry hall and we would scatter like cockroaches when the lights came on, everyone running to their own personal private bathroom. And in this neighborhood, friends. A neighborhood full of friends. Our realtor did a really good job of introducing all of our neighbors. He threw a homeowner barbecue for all of us. Everybody that moved in basically the same subdivision. He sent out invites. He actually set up the space. He had the realtor company actually pay for the foods. All we had to do was show up at a little park in the middle of our neighborhood. And we met almost all of our neighbors that day. Everyone that lived kind of in our little pod, everyone that had moved in around the same time. And you know what? It made it just that much easier to wave hello when you were walking down the street, or to strike up a casual conversation when you both got to the end of your driveway with your garbage can on Tuesday night, prepping for Wednesday morning pickup. We were able to meet people and make friends there. And it made for a wonderful end of the summer, and it made for a fantastic fall. But I may have mentioned to you, this was Ohio. Many of you are from the Midwestern region, from the Rust Belt, and you know what it's like when winter comes. Winter came, and we saw less and less of our neighbors. 12 years of never seeing or talking to a neighbor, and we didn't miss them at all. 4 months of friendly neighbors, and we couldn't figure out how to live without them. So my wife suggested we do something to bring the neighborhood together for an evening. Something that would keep us all connected and keep those friendships strong through this harsh winter. And after some discussion, we decided to throw a euchre party. Now, I'm always surprised when someone from the Midwest doesn't know what euchre is. I'll give you a brief just in case. If you're not familiar with it, euchre is a card game played with a partner. You and your partner play against another set of partners in this game. The rules are similar to bridge, but the deck has actually fewer cards to it. The game is played in rounds, which are scored, and the first team to 10 points wins. So games are relatively quick. Long game is going to last you 15 minutes because people are chit-chatting. Most games are shorter than that. And euchre is an easy game to run tournaments with. So there's plenty of opportunity to play against different partners. There's even opportunity, if you wanted to change partners or opponents and to mingle. So it seemed like the perfect kind of thing where we could get people together, small groups that could be chatting, and there'd be a way that they would kind of, intermix with each other. So we really keep these relationships going. We were super excited about it. We made invitations and we sent them out. Yes, we actually sent out paper invitations to our next door neighbors, and we invited them to join us to eat, to drink, and to play euchre. And we had a pretty good response. Lots of folks were showing up. So the night of the event, the day of the event, we prepared the house, we cleaned, we prepared. We set up the living, dining, and great room with card tables so there could be multiple games, but everybody was basically within eye shot or earshot of each other. So, very kind of high social interaction. And the way that our house was configured, the kitchen was kind of at the center of all of these rooms. So there was a center convening place for people to be able to get food, to get drinks, and to continue to, the conversations, right? So we really kind of made an area for high interaction. And then we printed the rules of euchre and the reference sheets, and we made them available at every single table. So, and then in the center at the kitchen, we had on the refrigerator the tournament sheet, so everyone could see where things were going with the tournament itself. All set up, perfect, ready to go. And then, of course, the guests arrived, and as friends and families arrived, we sent the kids off to the basement to play with each other, and we kept the adults upstairs so we could have adult-like activities and they could have kid-like activities. And our friend Linda was super friendly with everyone. Linda walked like 5 miles a day through the neighborhood, and as a result of that, she got to know everyone in the neighborhood. She'd arrived early to help us set up because that's just kind of how Linda is. And when other neighbors started to arrive who didn't know too many people, she made it her business to make introductions. She would make sure that the new couple that just moved in was introduced to some other couple that she thought they'd have common interest with. And she helped us to actually set up the first round for the tournament itself so that those couples could spend some time together in this situation. So the event is happening. People are playing cards, they're talking, they're going to get food at the kitchen. It was a beautiful thing for a while. But after a little while, conversations started to take over. People were mingling more in the kitchen, and they were chatting more than playing cards. It got hard to tell like what was going on in the tournament because some games were taking an hour. That's not even a euchre game. I don't know what's going on over there. And after a while, I started to notice that the crowd was starting to thin, but nobody left. All of the coats were still in the office. All of the shoes were still by the front door. Yet there were definitely less people on this floor. And no one was playing cards anymore. Everyone was just talking. This was a disaster. No one's playing euchre. People are disappearing. Well, what the hell is going on? How do we get them back to the card tables? How do we make this work again? Right? And then my son comes running up the stairs, bursts through the basement door, and announces to everyone, "Dad, we need more rum down here." But did he just, what? And he was like, "What?" And I was like, "What?" And he's like, "No, Dad, Mr. Z says we're out of rum and they need more down there." What? They? Down there? What? Stupid man cave. Maybe what I neglected to tell you earlier was that the basement was finished. Big screen TV, surround sound, gaming consoles, pool table, bar. You get the idea. Some of the guests had made their way downstairs. Maybe it was to check on kids. Maybe it was to shoot a game of pool because they knew the pool table was down there. I don't know why. But some of the guests had made their way downstairs. And as it turns out, a poker game had broken out in the middle of our euchre party. Now, I got to be honest with you, I was pretty pissed off. I was very angry, not just because Z drank all the rum, that I was used to from him, but because they were breaking the rules. We weren't here to play poker. We were here to play euchre, and we weren't going to be in the basement. We were going to be upstairs. But you know what? They were having fun. In fact, everybody was having fun. The adults in the basement playing poker were all talking to each other, and they were laughing, and they were having a good time. And the adults in the kitchen were all talking to each other, and they were laughing, and they were having a good time. Everybody was having fun. Everybody was talking and interacting. We had actually built the connection that we wanted to build. So because of space constraints, I invited them back upstairs so that we could all play poker. And the evening continued. Several more people joined into the game, after we moved upstairs. Other guests just hung out. But euchre was definitely over. But the night was definitely a success. People eventually went home, collected their things. The next morning, as is usual, somehow there's more beer in the fridge than you started with, and there's way less hard alcohol in the basement than you started with. And you've got 3 shoes that don't belong to you at the front door, 1 pair and 1 random, and a couple people left coats. Those all go back to each other. A couple of days later, we got a thank you letter. It's a very formal neighborhood, obviously. But one of the neighbors sent us a letter. When you open it up, it said, "Thank you so much for a good time. Poker night was great. We should do this again." And so it was. As a result of that evening, for more than a decade, the first Friday of every month was poker night in the neighborhood. We usually hosted it, but others stepped up in times of need, and they also hosted. There was a moment that night. There was a moment where I let go of what I thought was supposed to be, and I gave in to what was becoming. We had created the space. We had invited the people. We had begun the event and it changed. It moved. It became something that we had not expected, but it had produced the result that we desired. In fact, what happened was much bigger than we could have possibly dreamed of. Extend the fourth invitation to you. I'm going to invite you to take an in-depth look at these roles as we consider the story and as we consider, more importantly, your life at work. So we have the initiator, right? This person provides the initial sparks of what might become that broader initiative. Now, in the case of the party, you probably guessed there's a couple of cases where there are initiators, but the big one was my wife. She actually initiated the party in the first place. She's the one who suggested that we do something to help build connection in the neighborhood. And from that, we came up with Euchre Night. Another one that maybe is not as easy to recognize is that thank you card. That thank you card that suggested we do poker night again. That was actually another initiator, even if they didn't know that they were doing so. In our minds, it was still a Euchre night that had gone slightly wrong. Nice, but wrong. In their minds, it was a poker night that was perfect. They initiated a decade-long tradition. Now, what about at work for you? Who's the initiator? Are you ever an initiator? Typically, we think it's the boss, right? Or the business, if you will. They come up with the project. But what about the person who suggested you all do a potluck lunch? What about the person who asked if we could find a better way to do reviews on the team? What about you? Have you been an initiator at work? Have you been an initiator in your life? Can you be? About the inviter. So the inviter invites the relevant people to join the idea. Right? They reach out to the community. This might be private invitations. This might be a broad announcement. Now, for our party, we actually sent out invitations on paper. And of course, our realtor had also created a party. He had also sent out invitations, right? We decide to whom these invitations go and to whom they would not go. Even when we do a broadcast out to a community, oftentimes what we're doing is we're sending these broadcasts to a Slack channel where we know the people in that channel. We're sending these broadcasts to a mailing list where we know the individuals on that list. So even when it's kind of large, oftentimes it's still sort of, we have some intentions around who we're not inviting to a party. If I tell people about this conference on Twitter, I have a reasonable expectation that Brad Pitt's not going to show up because I sent out a tweet about this conference. Right? I kind of know who's in that group, even when something might go broader viral. Now, at a conference, not like this one, but conferences where we actually come together into rooms and sit, much like maybe next year's conference will be. I know that none of you have ever done this. Of course, none of you have ever done this, but have you ever witnessed someone who comes into the room and they sit down somewhere in a row and they place their bag on a chair right next to them? And then they kind of close up their body. And then someone comes along that they know and they move that bag into their lap and they open up. Both modes are an invitation, right? One is an invitation to stay away from me, and one is an invitation to join me. Now, again, let's think about this in the context of work. What kinds of invitations do you get? Obviously, there's invitations to a meeting, right? That type of thing. But what else? What other invitations do you give or receive? When you ask someone for help or their opinion or to review something that you've done, is that not actually an invitation? What about how the space is configured? What kinds of interactions does that invite or not invite? What about your evaluations and bonus programs? Are they not actually ways to invite people to behave in specific manners? Let's look at the space creator. So they create the environment, both physical and emotional, where something is really happening. Now, before the party, we created the space, right? We physically created space. We moved furniture. We prepared the rooms. We placed food at the center. We made sure, we looked at lighting. We provided sheets on how to play euchre. We actually even, euchre was part of kind of the space creation because it served a particular need. And then during the party, Mr. Z and others created a new space for a new behavior to emerge. Now, again, let's look at this at work. Obviously at work, there's the design of the space, right? Our executives in big offices, or my new favorite one is the executive who doesn't have an office, but then has a private conference room that's 3 times the size of an office that only he or she can use. Meanwhile, the workers are crammed into one big open space with long rows of tables. Are there quiet areas and team rooms? Is there enough room? But space creation isn't just about the physical space. What about the policies and guidelines? Those create space, those shape an experience. They are both an invitation to behave in a particular way, and they are a space creation. They set some emotional standards, right? And what about the emotional space that you actually work in? Is the environment relaxed? Is it too relaxed? Are you under constant pressure? Deadlines are looming. Financial ruin is only days away. If you don't get this done, you're going to get fired. That's all part of the space creation. Upholder. Now, the upholder protects the space that we've created, upholds the rules, sometimes has to remind others what the rules are. At that party, we did a lot of upholding, or at least we tried to. We made sure the kids were in the basement. We made sure the adults were upstairs. We reviewed the rules of euchre at the kickoff so everyone knew the guidelines. We literally posted the tournament status. And it was as an upholder, when I stepped back, took a breath, and realized that we had achieved exactly what we set out to achieve, even though we had not done what we had set out to do. When I decided to not enforce the euchre rule. Now, bringing this to work, upholders are those who enforce rules, policies, procedures, but they should also understand the purpose of those rules, policies, and procedures so they can better judge when to break the rule in order to uphold the intent. It's a mistake that we often make, is that our upholders are so rigid to the letter of the law that they forget what is the actual intent, why is that there, and allow for the space for that intent to be upheld with a better solution. Now, what about those with official authority? Maybe upholders, of course. Most people who are in a managerial director role, et cetera, they can be upholders. Now, we might not always like to be the upholder. We might not even want to serve as the upholder. And this role kind of requires balance. It's not just, it's just enough upholding, right? We've all heard of places where procedures supersede rational thought, or at least gets in the way of the actual go. Say, for example, production's down. It's costing us literally several $100,000 an hour while production is down. This is a reality in many organizations. We know the fix, and it's a simple change that could be coded, confirmed, and deployed in less than 10 minutes. But policy mandates 3 wet signatures on a completed change control form in order to move code to production. And that's going to take at least 3 hours. What should the upholders do in that moment? When you think about your place of work, who are the upholders? Have you ever been one? And if you have, how can you ensure that you're doing it well? All right, the connector. So the connector puts us in touch with people who otherwise would not, maybe, who might not be there, who might not have the opportunity to cooperate or collaborate or it just engage in the session. At the party, Linda was introducing people newer to the neighborhood to others and encouraging people to mingle. She was clearly our connector at that party. At work, connectors are crucial. They bridge gaps between teams, between departments, divisions, and even between companies. Connectors are the conduit for information, and they're often the ones who know best how things actually work around here. Odds are your organization is some form of hierarchy or thinks that it is. Reality is your organization is some kind of a mesh network, and these connectors make a significant difference in the way that information moves through that system. At work, are you a connector? In what ways could you be? How many people do you know in a department outside of your own? And who do you know that knows others? How might you benefit from inviting one of those people to your next design meeting? Our last role, of course, is co-participator. As a co-participator, we're also an important part of the system that we help to create. We're not just the creators of it. And sometimes the only role we play is that of co-participator. I'm an invitee. I played no other role. And yet, when I step into the role of co-participator, I'm acting as a leader, as I am when I step into every one of those other roles. A leader does not necessarily step into all of the roles. It is when any one of us steps into a role that we are becoming a leader. We are modeling behavior. We are helping to realize the desired outcome. Right now, for my wife and I, we played cards, we mingled, we were active at the party as equals. As a leader in an organization, this can be difficult. If you have a title of authority and you want to co-participate in the team's retrospective, you may not realize what kind of disruption you are creating. So there are times as a leader where you have to recognize that co-participation isn't necessarily the right thing to do for the group. But if you can build that trust, if you have that rapport, maybe even in moments of high vulnerability, you can co-participate with your teams. Now, this is a model, just like servant leadership is a model. And as we know, models are useful, but they're also all wrong. I think the model of host leadership is actually quite useful. And I hope it's helped you to consider leadership maybe from a different perspective. As we look at these 6 roles and we think about a host overall, it's not too difficult to see that sometimes a host assumes a position of authority or power. Maybe they have to enforce the no red wine on the white carpet rule, right? And at times the host is literally serving others. Our models of Lord leader and servant leader coexist within the host framework. It's not either this or that. It's a matter of moment and context. We saw at the party, the host can't control all elements. There are moments where the host has to decide to play the upholder or allow the new rules to emerge. They cannot obsess too much over space creation. They can't manage the invitations in all cases. And many leaders need to spend a lot more time co-participating. I invite you to think about your leadership role at work. I don't care what your title is. We're all leaders. We all step into these roles on occasion throughout our work experiences. What do you initiate? How do you extend invitations? What space do you create or help to create? What upholding do you do? How do you create connection? And how do you co-participate with others? And maybe most importantly, as you think about this model and you think about your role at work, and maybe beginning to, for the first time, allow yourself to think about yourself as a leader, what will you do differently from now on? My final invitation to you this morning is a simple one. I invite you to lead, to initiate, to invite, to create space, to uphold, to connect, and to co-participate. Thank you.